John. "Sam?" John called softly. The air smelled of paper and dust and years. Before him tall wooden shelves rose up into dimness, crammed with leather-bound books and bins of ancient scrolls. A faint yellow glow flitted across the stacks from some hidden lamp. John blew out the taper he carried, preferring not to risk an open flame amid so much dry old paper. Instead he followed the light, wending his way down the narrow aisles beneath beryl-vaulted ceilings. All in black, he was a shadow among shadows, dark of hair, long of face, grey of eye. Black moleskin gloves covered his hands, the right because it was burned, the left because a man felt half a fool wearing only one glove. Samwell Tarly sat hunched over a table in a niche carved into the stone of the wall. The glow came from the lamp hung over his head. He looked up at the sound of John's steps. "Have you been here all night?" "Have I?" Sam looked startled. "You didn't break your fast with us, and your bed hadn't been slipped in." Rast suggested that maybe Sam had deserted, but John never believed it. Desertion required its own sort of courage, and Sam had little enough of that. "Is it morning? Down here there's no way to know." "Sam, you're a sweet fool," John said. "You'll miss that bed when you're sleeping in cold, hard ground, I promise you." Sam yawned. "Maester Aemon sent me to find maps for the Lord Commander. I never thought—" "John, the books! Have you ever seen their like? There are thousands!" He gazed around him. "The library at Winterfell has more than 100. Did you find the maps?" "Oh, yes." Sam's hand swept across the table, fingers plump as sausages, indicating the clutter of books and scrolls before him. "A dozen, at least." He unfolded a square of parchment. "The paint has faded, but you can see the map-maker marked the sites of wildling villages, and there's another book. Where is it now? I was reading it a moment ago." He shoved some scrolls aside to reveal a dusty volume bound in rotted leather. "This," he said reverently, "is the account of a journey from the Shadow Tower all the way to Lorne Point on the frozen shore, written by a ranger named Redwyn. It's not dated, but he mentions a Doran Stark as king in the north, so it must be from before the conquest. John, they fought giants! Redwyn even traded with the children of the forest. It's all here." Ever so delicately he turned the pages with a finger. "He drew maps as well. See?" "Maybe you could write an account of our ranging, Sam." He'd meant to sound encouraging, but it was the wrong thing to say. The last thing Sam needed was to be reminded of what faced them on the morrow. He shuffled the scrolls about aimlessly. "There's more maps. If I had time to search. Everything's a jumble. I could set it all to order, though. I know I could, but it would take time. Well, years, in truth." "Mormont wanted those maps a little sooner than that." John plucked a scroll from the bin, blew off the worst of the dust. A corner flaked off between his fingers as he unrolled it. "Look, this one's crumbling," he said, frowning over the faded script. "Be gentle." Sam came round the table and took the scroll from his hand, holding it as if it were a wounded animal. "The important books used to be copied over when they needed them. Some of the oldest have been copied 100 times, probably." "Well, don't bother copying that one. 23 barrels of pickled cod, 18 jars of fish oil, a cask of salt." "An inventory," Sam said. "Or perhaps a bill of sale." "Who cares how much pickled cod they ate 600 years ago?" John wondered. "I would." Sam carefully replaced the scroll in the bin from which John had plucked it. "You can learn so much from ledgers like that, truly you can. I can tell you how many men were in the Night's Watch then, how they lived, what they ate." "They ate food," John said, "and they lived as we live." "You'd be surprised. This vault is a treasure, John." "If you say so." John was doubtful. Treasure meant gold, silver, and jewels, not dust, spiders, and rotting leather. "I do," the fat boy blurted. He was older than John, a man grown by law, but it was hard to think of him as anything but a boy. "I found drawings of the faces in the trees, and a book about the tongue of the children of the forest. Works that even the Citadel doesn't have. Scrolls from old Valyria. Counts of the seasons written by maesters dead 1,000 years. "The books'll be here when we return." "If we return." "The old bear is taking some 200 seasoned men. 3/4 of them rangers. Core and Half-Hand'll be bringing another 100 brothers from the Shadow Tower. You'll be safe as if you were back in your Lord Father's castle at Hornhill." Samwell Tarly managed a sad little smile. "I was never very safe in my father's castle either." The gods play cruel jests, John thought. Pip and Toad, all alather to be a part of the great ranging, were to remain at Castle Black. It was Samwell Tarly, the self-proclaimed coward, grossly fat, timid, and near as bad a rider as he was with a sword, who must face the haunted forest. The old bear was taking 2 cages of ravens so they might send back word as they went. Maester Aemon was blind and far too frail to ride with them, so his steward must go in his place. "We need you for the ravens, Sam, and someone has to help me keep Gren humble." Sam's chins quivered. "You could care for the ravens, or Gren could, or anyone," he said with a thin edge of desperation in his voice. "I could show you how. You know your letters, too. You could write down Lord Mormont's messages as well as I." "I'm the old bear's steward. I'll need to squire for him, tend his horse, set up his tent. I won't have time to watch over birds as well. Sam, you said the words. You're a brother of the Night's Watch now." "A brother of the Night's Watch shouldn't be so scared." "We're all scared. We'd be fools if we weren't." Too many rangers had been lost the past 2 years, even Benjen Stark, John's uncle. They'd found 2 of his uncle's men in the wood, slain, but the corpses had risen in the chill of night. John's burnt fingers twitched as he remembered. He still saw the white in his dreams, dead Othor with the burning blue eyes and the cold black hands. But that was the last thing Sam needed to be reminded of. "There's no shame in fear," my father told me. "What matters is how we face it. Come, I'll help you gather up the maps." Sam nodded unhappily. The shelves were so closely spaced they had to walk single file as they left. The vault opened onto one of the tunnels the brothers called the Worm Walks, winding subterranean passages that linked the keeps and towers of Castle Black under the earth. In summer the Worm Walks were seldom used, save by rats and other vermin, but winter was a different matter. When the snows drifted 40 and 50 feet high, and the ice winds came howling out of the north, the tunnels were all that held Castle Black together. Soon, John thought as they climbed. He'd seen the harbinger that had come to Maester Aemon with the word of summer's end, the great raven of the citadel, white and silent as ghost. He had seen a winter once, when he was very young, but everyone agreed that it had been a short one, and mild. This one would be different. He could feel it in his bones. The deep stone steps had Sam puffing like a blacksmith's bellows by the time they reached the surface. They emerged into a brisk wind that made John's cloak swirl and snap. Ghost was stretched out asleep beneath the wattle and daub wall of the granary, but he woke when John appeared, bushy white tail held stiffly upright as he trotted to them. Sam squinted at the wall. It loomed over them, an icy cliff 700 feet high. Sometime it seemed to John almost a living thing, with moods of its own. The colour of the ice was wont to change with every shift of the light. Now it was the deep blue of frozen rivers, now the dirty white of old snow, and when a cloud passed before the sun it darkened to the pale grey of pitted stone. The wall stretched out east and west as far as the eye could see, so huge that it shrunk the timbered keeps and stone towers of the castle to insignificance. It was the end of the world. And we are going beyond it. The morning sky was streaked by thin grey clouds, but the pale red line was there just behind them. The Black Brothers had dubbed the wanderer Mormont's torch, saying, only half in jest, that the gods must have sent it to light the old man's way through the haunted forest. "The comet's so bright you can see it by day now," Sam said, shielding his eyes with a fistful of books. "Never mind about comets, it's the maps that the old bear wants." Ghost loped ahead of them. The grounds seemed deserted this morning with so many rangers off at the brothel in Molestown, digging for buried treasure and drinking themselves blind. Gren had gone with them. Pip and Halder and Toad had offered to buy him his first woman to celebrate his first ranging. They'd wanted John and Sam to come as well, but Sam was almost as frightened of whores as he was of the haunted forest, and John had wanted no part of it. "Do what you want," he told Toad. "I took a vow." As they passed the sept, he heard voices raised in song. Some men want whores on the eve of battle, and some want gods. John wondered who felt better afterward. The sept tempted him no more than the brothel. His own gods kept their temples in the wild places, where the weirwoods spread their bone-white branches. The seven have no power beyond the wall, he thought, but my gods will be waiting. Outside the armory, Sir Andrew Tarth was working with some raw recruits. They'd come in last night with Conway, one of the wandering crows who roamed the seven kingdoms collecting men for the wall. This new crop consisted of a greybeard leaning on a staff, 2 blonde boys with the look of brothers, a foppish youth in soiled satin, a raggy man with a club foot, and some grinning loon who must have fancied himself a warrior. Sir Andrew was showing them the error of that presumption. He was a gentler master-at-arms than Sir Alistair Thorne had been, but his lessons would still raise bruises. Sam winced at every blow, but Jon Snow watched the sword-play closely. "What do you make of them, Snow?" Donald Noy stood in the door of his armory, bare-chested under a leather apron, the stump of his left arm uncovered for once. With his big gut and barrel chest, his flat nose and bristly black jaw, Noy did not make a pretty sight, but he was a welcome one nonetheless. The armourer had proved himself a good friend. "They smell of summer," Jon said as Sir Andrew bull-rushed his foe and knocked him sprawling. "Where did Conway find 'em?" "Lord's dungeon near Gulltown," the smith replied. "A brigand, a barber, a beggar, 2 orphans, and a boy-whore. With such do we defend the realms of men." "They'll do." Jon gave Sam a private smile. "We did." Noy drew him closer. "You've heard these tidings of your brother?" "Last night." Conway and his chargers had brought the news north with them, and the talk in the common room had been of little else. Jon was still not certain how he felt about it. Rob a king? The brother he'd played with, fought with, shared his first cup of wine with? But not mother's milk, no. So now Rob will sip summertime wine from jewelled goblets while I'm kneeling beside some stream sucking snow-melt from cupped hands. "Rob'll make a good king," he said loyally. "Will he now?" The smith eyed him frankly. "I hope that's so, boy, but once I might have said the same about Robert." "They say you forged his warhammer," Jon remembered. "Aye, I was his man, a Baratheon man, smith and armourer at Storm's End until I lost the arm. I'm old enough to remember Lord Stephen before the sea took him, and I knew those 3 sons of his since they got their names. And I'll tell you this, Robert was never the same after he put on that crown. Some men are like swords, made for fighting. Hang them up and they just go to rust." "And his brothers?" Jon asked. The armourer considered that for a moment. "Robert was the true steel. Stannis is pure iron, black and hard and strong, yes, but brittle the way iron gets. He'll break before he bends. And Renly, that one's copper. He's bright and shiny, pretty to look at, but not worth all that much at the end of the day." "And what metal is Rob?" Jon did not dare ask. Noy was a Baratheon man. Likely he thought Joffrey the lawful king and Rob a traitor. Among the Brotherhood of the Night's Watch there was an unspoken pact never to probe too deeply into such matters. Men came to the wall from all 7 kingdoms, and old loves and loyalties are not easily forgotten, no matter how many oaths a man swore, as Jon himself had a good reason to know. Even Sam, his father's house, was sworn to Highgarden, whose Lord Tyrell supported King Renly. Best not to talk of such things. The Night's Watch took no sides. "Lord Mormont awaits us," Jon said. "I won't keep you from the old bear." Noy clapped him on the shoulder and smiled. "May the gods go with you on the morrow, Snow. Bring back that uncle of yours, you hear?" "We will," Jon promised him. Lord Commander Mormont had taken up his residence in the King's Tower after the fire had gutted his own. Jon left Ghost with the guards outside. "More stairs," Sam said miserably as they started up. "I hate stairs." "Well, that's one thing we won't face in the wood." When they entered the solar, the raven spied them at once. "Snow!" the bird shrieked. Mormont broke off his conversation. "Took you long enough with those maps." He pushed the remains of breakfast out of the way to make room on the table. "Put them here. I'll have a look at them later." Thorin Smallwood, a sinewy ranger with a weak chin and a weaker mouth hidden under a thin scraggle of beard, gave Jon and Sam a cool look. He'd been one of Alistair Thorne's henchmen and had no love for either of them. "The Lord Commander's place is at Castle Black, lording and commanding," he told Mormont, ignoring the newcomers. "It seems to me." The raven flapped its big black wings. "Me, me, me!"
"If you are ever Lord Commander, you may do as you please," Mormont told the ranger. "But it seems to me that I have not died yet, nor have the brothers put you in my place."
"I'm first ranger now, with Ben Stark lost and Jeremy killed," Smallwood said stubbornly. "The command should be mine." Mormont would have none of it.
"I sent out Ben Stark and Sir Waymar before him. I do not mean to send you out after them and sit wondering how long I must wait before I give you up for lost as well," he pointed. "And Stark remains first ranger until we know for a certainty he's dead. Should that day come, it will be me who names his successor, not you. Now stop wasting my time. We ride at first light, or have you forgotten?"
Smallwood pushed to his feet. "As my lord commands." On his way out he frowned at John as if it was somehow his fault.
"First ranger!"
The old bear's eyes lighted on Sam.
"I'd sooner name you first ranger. He has the effrontery to tell me to my face that I'm too old to ride with him. Do I look old to you, boy?"
The hair that had retreated from Mormont's spotted scalp had regrouped beneath his chin in a shaggy grey beard that covered much of his chest. He thumped it hard.
"Do I look frail?"
Sam opened his mouth, gave it a little squeak. The old bear terrified him.
"No, my lord," John offered quickly. "You look as strong as a... Don't cozen me, Snow. You know I won't have it. Let me have a look at these maps."
Mormont pored through them brusquely, giving each no more than a glance and a grunt.
"Was this all you could find?"
"My lord," Sam stammered. There were more, but the disorder—"
"These are old,"
Mormont complained, and his raven echoed him with a sharp cry of,
"Old! Old!" "The villages may come and go, but the hills and rivers will be in the same places," John pointed out. "True enough. Have you chosen your ravens yet, Tarley?"
"Maester Raymond means to pick them come even fall after the feeding."
"I'll have his best. Smart birds and strong."
"Strong!" his own bird said, preening. "Strong! Strong!"
"If it happens we're all butchered out there, I mean for my successor to know where and how we died."
Talk of butchery reduced Samwell Tarley to speechlessness. Mormont leaned forward.
"Tarley, when I was a lad half your age, my lady mother told me that if I stood about with my mouth open, a weasel was like to mistake it for his lair and run down my throat. If you have something to say it. Otherwise, beware of weasels."
He waved a brusque dismissal.
"Off with you, I'm too busy for folly. No doubt the maester has some work you can do."
Sam swallowed, stepped back, and scurried out so quickly he almost tripped over the rushes.
"Is that boy as big a fool as he seems?"
the Lord Commander asked when he'd gone.
"Fool!"
the raven complained. Mormont didn't wait for John to answer.
"His lord father stands high in King Renly's councils, and I had half a notion to dispatch him. No, best not. Renly is not like to heed a quaking fat boy. I'll send Sir Arnell. He's a deal steadier, and his mother was one of those green apple Fossaways." "If it please, my lord, what would you have of King Renly?" "The same things I'd have of all of them, lad. Men, horses, swords, armour, grain, cheese, wine, wool, nails. The Night's Watch is not proud. We take what is offered." His fingers drummed against the rough-hewn planks of the table. "If the winds have been kind, Sir Alistair should reach King's Landing by the turn of the moon. But whether this boy Joffrey will pay him any heed, I don't know. House Lannister has never been a friend of the Watch." "Thorne has the White's hand to show them." A grisly pale thing with black fingers it was, that twitched and stirred in its jar as if it were alive. "Would that we had another hand to send to Renly." "Tywin says you can find anything beyond the wall." "Aye, Tywin says. And the last time he went ranging he said he saw a bear 15 feet tall." Mormont snorted. "My sister is said to have taken a bear for her lover. I'd believe that before I'd believe one 15 feet tall. Though in a world where the dead come walking, Ah, even so a man must believe his eyes. I have seen the dead walk. I have not seen any giant bears."
He gave John a long, searching look.
"But we are speaking of hands. How is yours?"
"Better." John peeled off his moleskin glove and showed him. Scars covered his arm halfway up to the elbow, and the mottled pink flesh still felt tight and tender, but it was healing.
"It itches, though. Maester Aemon says that's good. He gave me a salve to take with me when we ride." "You can wield Longclaw despite the pain?"
"Well enough." John flexed his fingers, opening and closing the fist the way the maester had shown him.
"I'm to work the fingers every day to keep them nimble, as Maester Aemon says. Blind he may be, but Aemon knows what he's about. I pray the gods let us keep him another 20 years. Do you know that he might have been king?"
John was taken by surprise.
"He told me his father was king, but not... I thought him perhaps a younger son." "So he was. His father's father was Daeron Targaryen, the second of his name, who brought Dawn into the realm. Part of the pact was that he wed a Dornish princess. She gave him 4 sons. Aemon's father Maekar was the youngest of those, and Aemon was his 3rd son. Mind you, all this happened long before I was born, ancient as Smallwood would make me." "Maester Aemon was named for the Dragon Knight."
"So he was. Some say Prince Aemon was King Daeron's true father, not Aegon the Unworthy. Be that as it may, our Aemon lacked the Dragon Knight's martial skill. He likes to say he had a slow mind but quick wits. Small wonder his grandfather packed him off to the Citadel. He was 9 or 10, I believe, and 9th or 10th in the line of succession as well."
Maester Aemon had counted more than 100 name-days, John knew. Frail, shrunken, wizened, and blind, it was hard to imagine him as a little boy no older than Arya. Mormont continued.
"Aemon was at his books when the eldest of his uncles, their heir apparent, was slain in a tourney mishap. He left 2 sons, but they followed him to the grave not long after, during the great spring sickness. King Daeron was also taken, so the crown passed to Daeron's 2nd son, Aerys."
"The Mad King?"
John was confused. Aerys had been king before Robert. That wasn't so long ago.
"No, this was Aerys the First. The one Robert deposed was the 2nd one of that name."
"How long ago was this?"
80 years are close enough," the old bear said. "And no, I still hadn't been born, though Aemon forged 6 links in his maester's chain by then. Aerys wed his own sister, as the Targaryens were wont to do, and reigned for 10 or 12 years. Aemon took his vows and left the Citadel to serve at some lordling's court, until his royal uncle died without issue. The Iron Throne passed to the last of King Daeron's 4 sons. That was Maekar, Aemon's father. The new king summoned all his sons to court and would have made Aemon part of his councils, but he refused, saying that would usurp the place rightly belonging to the Grand Maester. Instead, he served at the keep of his eldest brother, another Daeron. Well, that one died too, leaving only a feeble-witted daughter as heir. Some pox he caught from a whore, I believe. The next brother was Aryan."
"Aryan the Monstrous?"
John knew that name. The prince who thought he was a dragon was one of old Nan's more gruesome tales. His little brother Bran had loved it.
"The very one, though he named himself Aryan Brightflame. One night, in his cups, he drank a jar of wildfire, after telling his friends it would transform him into a dragon. The gods were kind, and it transformed him into a corpse. Not quite a year after, King Maekar died in battle against an outlaw lord."
John was not entirely innocent of the history of the realm. His own maester had seen to that.
"That was the year of the Great Council," he said. "The lords passed over Prince Aryan's infant son and Prince Daeron's daughter, and gave the crown to Aegon."
"Yes and no. First they offered it, quietly, to Aemon, and quietly he refused. The gods meant for him to serve, not to rule, he told them. He'd sworn a vow and would not break it, though the High Septim himself offered to absolve him. Well, no sane man wanted any blood of Aryans on the throne, and Daeron's girl was a lackwit beside being a female, so they had no choice but to turn to Aemon's younger brother, Aegon, the 5th of his name. Aegon the Unlikely, they call him, born the 4th son of a 4th son. Aemon knew, and rightly, that if he remained at court, those who disliked his brother's rule would seek to use him, So he came to the wall, and here he's remained, while his brother and his brother's son and his son each reigned and died in turn, until Jaime Lannister put an end to the line of dragon kings."
"King!" croaked the raven. The bird flapped across the solar to land on Mormont's shoulder. "King!" it said again, strutting back and forth.
"He likes that word,"
Jon said, smiling.
"An easy word to say, and an easy word to like."
"King!" the bird said again.
"I think he means for you to have a crown, my lord." "The realm has 3 kings already, and that's too many for my liking."
Mormont stroked the raven underneath the beak with a finger, but all the while his eyes never left Jon Snow. It made him feel odd.
"My lord, why have you told me this about Maester Aemon?"
"Must I have a reason?"
Mormont shifted in his seat, frowning.
"Your brother Robb has been crowned king in the north, and you and Aemon have that in common. A king for a brother."
"And this too," said Jon. "A vow."
The old bear gave a loud snort, and the raven took flight, flapping in a circle about the room.
"Give me a man for every vow I've broken, and the wall will never lack for defenders."
"I've always known that Robb would be Lord of Winterfell."
Mormont gave a whistle, and the bird flew to him again and settled on his arm.
"A lord's one thing, a king's another."
He offered the raven a handful of corn from his pocket.
"They will garb your brother Robb in silks, satins, and velvets of 100 different colours, while you live and die in black ring mail. He will wed some beautiful princess and father sons on her. You'll have no wife, nor will you ever hold a child of your own blood in your arms. Robb will rule, you will serve. Men will call you a crow. Him they'll call your grace. Singers will praise every little thing he does, while your greatest deeds will all go unsung. Tell me that none of this troubles you, Jon, and I'll name you a liar and know I have the truth of it."
Jon drew himself up, taut as a bowstring.
"And if it did trouble me, what might I do, bastard as I am?"
"What will you do?" Mormont asked, "bastard as you are."
"Be troubled,"
said Jon,
"and keep my vows."
So, back on the wall.
Back on the wall.
With Jon Snow.
Jon Snow, allegedly. The past 3 chapters have been titled Jon, but really, if you had to guess, they would be titled Aemon.
Yeah, we got a lot more information about Aemon this time. We got a lot more information about Aemon last time. And this time we found out Aemon could have been king.
But he said no. And he voluntarily joined the Watch, which I think was something I pointed out. Like, was it his choice to be up there? Did he do bad?
I think this is the perfect example of someone who doesn't want power, but probably could have done very, very well with power, specifically because he didn't want it. But in this instance, he refused it. And Egg became king. And from what I know about podcasts, etc., Egg was a king who championed the rights of the small folk and really tried to give the small folk more rights. And it kind of pissed everyone off.
Oh,
so
yeah,
maybe
God forbid the little people have a say in things.
Right.
How dare he?
But it kind of sounds like Egg was very progressive, right?
Yeah. Not something you want in your monarchy.
No, in your feudalist society. So we definitely get a little bit of Targaryen history and backstory, which was super fascinating for me because I love all of... So, when I was in school, one of my favorite things was history, and I loved reading historical books where they go through and they break everything down and they talk about like the family histories and the dramas and all the things that shape the political atmosphere at the time and how the actions of this person and that person shape this and that. Like, I love all of that stuff. And a lot of people think that that stuff is like really dry. But I love all of the backstory and his legitimate sounding historical fact that Martin puts in the books, because it very much sounds like a lot of books I've read about, like the Habsburg dynasty, or I read a lot of books about the start of World War One and how the royal families across Europe and their actions kind of led to World War One, but it's all very convoluted and this and that, and it just kind of reminds me of like what Martin is doing with the Targaryens and all the historical context, and I love that stuff. I know a
Well,
lot
I
of
think
people might think that's dry, but that's part of why I liked Fire and Blood so much, because it was just a true like historical account of the dynasty, and
sure,
I
I
just like
think
eat that stuff up.
and it's, history repeats itself. I think it's the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
Again, these good spots and yada yada,
Well,
origins. But
if you don't learn from history, it'll repeat itself, right? If you don't take the lessons from history, it'll come back and reverberate.
well, I mean, yeah.
And
Look,
humans
they
aren't
did it.
really good at it. They
They
don't really learn from history. They keep
look at
doing the same thing over and over.
look at Westeros right now. I mean, they had the Mad King, and they got rid of him for a little bit, but now Joffrey's there and looking a bit like a Mad King.
Right. Right. Yeah, case in point. If you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat it.
Mm. Although, it seems like a lot of the small people don't agree with Joffrey as much. We learned from the Cersei chapter.
The art
Though we can talk about that. This is Jon Snow's chapter, and
the
we don't.
Cersei chapter? We don't
Okay,
have
the Tyrion chapter where we talk to Cersei.
Yeah.
But we can't talk about that right now because we're on the wall, and we
Right.
don't dabble in the horrors of the realm
No.
on the wall.
The wall is secular from the troubles of the realm, which
But
the biggest thing to me in this chapter, the biggest point that I think Martin is trying to make in this chapter, because he spends a lot of time describing the library, right?
Mhm.
He talks about the scrolls and the dustiness and the number of tomes and all the aisles and all the books, and John relates it to the library in Winterfell. Martin is very much stating that prior to the internet, prior to the advent of modern tech, like, knowledge had weight. Knowledge
literally,
had volume. Knowledge had a
literally
smell.
many volumes.
Right.
Encyclopedia
Knowledge
volumes.
knowledge was physical. It had a smell. It was tangible.
And took a lot of work, apparently, because if you wanted to keep a book, you had to keep rewriting it by hand.
Right.
With quills.
And
you can write like 2 words if you're lucky, and then you got to dip it back in.
right. And through Sam, we understand that the persistence of knowledge is based on the human capability of copying things down and copying them down and recopying them and recopying them, and considering the amount of time and effort it takes to literally recopy a 2,000 page tome by hand with a quill on parchment. And Sam seems to really understand this concept, whereas John doesn't seem to really grasp it, because he's like, this is inventory. This is just inventory of what people ate. What does it matter?
Well,
Blah,
I think
blah.
it's because
And Sam says, no, it tells you a lot about how people lived 2,000-3,000 years ago. It tells you a lot about what these people were doing 2,000-3,000 years ago. And I think it rings true for, say, like, modern day archaeologists. Like, if an archaeologist found an inventory of an ancient Egyptian house's food supply, like, they'd go bananas because they'd be like, "Oh my God, here it is. This is I can see what people ate and what they did and how often they ate this and how often they ate that."
Yeah, kind of a tangent on there. I did see that some archaeologists found like yeast remains, and they were able to actually breed some of these yeasts that people used to use. They found it in like a pot used for brewing alcohol, and they actually made bread like they used to make and stuff. And they
Ancient
tried
Egyptian
basically
bread.
tried ancient bread. That was really cool. But
I want to try ancient bread. I want
though
to know what that shit tastes like.
Though I do agree with you about that. Like the whole book thing, usually when I'm reading a story, kind of gets lost on me because I think it's kind of a trope. Like most novels you read, there's some form of, books or knowledge. Knowledge is power, just books are power, that sort of thing. Because surprisingly, authors are a little biased towards that. They're
They really
always, oh
are.
man.
They really are.
But
It's very much a thing because you
But I
think
mean,
about
it's
it.
pretty obvious why. I mean, it's their livelihood.
Right.
Obviously, they're in love with books if they're writing books. So
But
they're.
you also have to consider, like, up until recently,
And I'm not saying that oh, they're wrong. They're biased like that.
yeah,
They're right, but
but up
I feel
until,
like in every story there's always that trope in there about it.
right.
So I kind of overlook that. And what I really got from this was less of the whole book aspect and more of the everyone has their own strengths, no matter how cowardly or pathetic they may seem. Like you have Sam, who just seems like he's not good at anything whatsoever. He's
He can't
he
fight.
can't
He's
fight.
scared.
He's
Blah, blah, blah.
scared. He's fat. All these negative things, but then you find that Sam is very intelligent and uh he has a good mind.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's like come across with a lot of it is everyone has their own strengths and abilities, and just because someone maybe fails in one area doesn't mean that they're not as useful as everyone else.
And I also think that Martin uses the construct of a feudalistic society to further push that, because feudalism and feudalistic society only values certain traits. So when you have characters like Sam, like Arya,
Well, yeah, I
who
feel like
don't
every
fit the
character
mold,
does. I feel like every character in this kind of does, but I think Sam like highlights that like
I think
extremely well.
Sam highlights that. I think Arya highlights that, and there's some other characters who also highlight that. I think Dany highlights that their strengths don't necessarily apply to what the standards are, but their strengths nonetheless. And it's kind of almost that the society in which they're stuck in makes their strengths kind of glow up even more, because the expectations are this, but their strengths don't apply to what the expectations are. And you see Sam and Arya and Dany like fighting against that to a certain degree. So it almost makes it more blatant that like Sam's intellect and his ability to analyze data and read and focus in on literature, and by contrast Arya's ability to fight and analyze a situation, just show you that these social constructs are BS and they don't fit, because you have people who have extraordinary strengths but they just don't fit what society is looking for, but these strengths are extremely valuable.
It's kind of like I forget what we were speaking of exactly in the live stream, but I did say I can't remember who says the quote, but if you I think it was Einstein actually. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, of course you're going to say it's stupid.
Yeah, you did mention that in the live stream, and that is an Einstein quote. Yeah. But I just love Martin's description of the physicality of knowledge, and I get his author's bias, because I also think Rowling does this because she has two novels, Chamber of Secrets and Half-Blood Prince.
It's honestly every book you can find it. There's even the smallest mention, there will be this like
Well,
theme in there.
I think Rowling does it very blatantly because Chamber of Secrets and Half-Blood Prince are the plots are based on books within a book, right? Harry in both books, he has the diary, and then in 6 he has the potions book, right? And they're physical things that he physically reads. And I feel like it's definitely an author's thing, and we'll see it with Stephen King if we continue to foray more into Stephen King. It's kind of an author's thing
that's an author's thing, and you can even see the same thing showing up in like movies. You notice like in a lot of movies, or probably most movies, there's like a scene in a movie theater. Either, some secret agents are meeting in a movie theater, or
Yep.
there's a date going on in a movie theater.
Yep,
Like
yep,
the
yep.
movie trope is there. So there's always that little bias in there.
And I'm not gonna lie, I feel like me personally, I am also very biased in the sense that, now don't get me wrong, since a lot of you really love listening to me read, I totally get that. But me personally, and maybe this is what makes me a good audiobook reader, but me personally, I like physically holding the book in my hands and reading it and listening inside my head to what the characters sound like. I just physically enjoy holding that in my hands. Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, scientific literature or scientific books or whatever it is that I'm reading at the time, I physically enjoy having the actual information being held in my hands.
So you
Nothing
would be in heaven if you were Sam right now in this
like
library.
I read this chapter thinking like, oh my god, if I was Sam Tarly, I would be reading everything I could possibly get my hands on. And I would be sitting here going, where is the Library of Alexandria of Westeros? Like, I read about the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and I'm sad about it. And that shit happened thousands of years ago. Like, I go into a library and I'm just like, the information, the knowledge, it's tangible, it's right here. But at the same time, the lesson of the Library of Alexandria kind of tells us how important the internet is, right? Because the Library of Alexandria was burnt to the ground because the knowledge was physical. So it was burnt to the ground and then it's lost. So if you burn all the books, they're gone. But with the internet, you can't burn the internet. It's always there. You could.
It's harder.
But it's a lot harder, right? You could burn the Library of Winterfell.
Mm.
But you can't burn.
And it was done.
And it did happen. And like,
Lannister.
Just saying, like, Rob and Catelyn don't seem to be as upset about it as I am. I'm just like, the Library of Winterfell is destroyed. That's terrible. Who knows how much information about the First Men and the Children of the Forest is in there?
Right?
I'm just saying.
Maybe Sam could have found some good information about, maybe there were some maps in there.
Right, maybe
the Starks, they were pretty acquainted with the Wall and the First Men.
Right. What if there was some good maps in there?
Exactly. I guess we went on kind of a bit of a tangent. So before we get back on track, I will say I do agree with you. So I have like a process when I read a book. When I first read a book, I prefer to have the book in my hand and read it. But because I retain more that way. But
same
for audiobooks, audiobooks get me more immersed. When you can just like throw on your earbuds and just like lay down in bed and just close your eyes and just like you're almost transported there. What happens at the end?
So Sam brings the maps, John comes in, and Mormont like pretty much tells Sam, like, I don't care if you're scared, you're coming because you're the best and you can.
Well, he's not the best, but he's the only one who can physically go because Aemon's too old.
Well, I mean, the best at like writing and sending and taking care of the ravens because Maester Aemon is too old.
And I
then
think he's the only other one who knows how to do all that.
right, who
So I
knows?
mean, I
Mormont,
guess I'm like cutting Sam short a bit, but he's
no, I think Mormont. I think in a way Mormont is actually giving him a compliment, but Sam is too scared to realize like that Mormont is saying like you're literally the only person I trust other than Maester Aemon to handle the ravens while we're out on this dangerous mission because obviously he doesn't trust Clytus or any of the other guys. He's like, Sam,
no.
you're kind of like the dude. And then Sam leaves because he's too fucking scared to recognize that Mormont is saying like I'm putting my faith in you. And then he talks to John again about like, dude, where do your loyalties lie? Because the last time John tried to fucking run away.
This time he's talking about, your brother's king, and
How did that fit?
making it hard for him too. Like he's gonna be called
Your
your
grace.
grace. You're gonna be called Crow.
Right.
You're gonna be freezing your butt off, and he's gonna be warm in silks
And people will sing songs about him and all your deeds will go unsung and this and that and like I think
it's like,
it's not
well, when you put it that way, Jesus.
I don't think he's so much trying to rub it in John's face as to try and get John to realize the reality of the situation.
And I think he's trying to gauge his reaction before they go beyond the wall, so he knows like how much trust he should be putting into John. Because once you're beyond the wall, that's uncharted territory.
Yeah, you have
You
to work
see,
as a team.
they barely have a map of where they're going. They have a map that can kind of show them the streams and the hills, and
Yep.
outside of that, they're just.
And they have to rely on each other and they have to really be a solid team and really depend on each other. And I think John's response is brilliant. And I think John's response shows a real level of maturity from the last book where he says, it sucks and I don't like it. And, it really does stick in my craw that he'll be his grace and I'll be this and that. But you know what? I swore a vow and I will do my duty.
Mm-hmm. And basically at the end he says, well, I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna brood the whole time because I'm Jon Snow.
I'm Jon Snow and I brood. And I'll pet my best boy Ghost while I brood. Because Ghost is the best boy. And he deserves all the pets.
And just to point it out, because I think we've pointed out every chapter on the wall, another visual representation of the wall. Another visual representation of the wall is how it changes through the weather.
I think all of the descriptions of the wall are so interesting.
Character.
It does. It kind of takes on a life of its own, almost like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining or the Cathedral in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It really does kind of have its own personality, and all the descriptions kind of give it this like mystical, deep magic vibe.
Yeah.
That it really is this kind of big, mysterious entity almost.
Well, yeah.
And
no
it's
one
always
really knows
through
how it was even built at this point.
And it's always through John. John is always looking at the wall and it changes and it's this and it's that, and John always kind of just has these feelings about the wall, which are also very interesting. That it's not just that he observes that it changes the light, but it almost is kind of like he's really taking this in and like wondering about how the wall was built and who built it and is it magic and is it this. It kind of not only is the wall its own character almost, but it kind of gets under John's skin how almost paranormal it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very cool.
Exactly. But yeah, I think that was pretty much it.
That was it. We talked about this a lot. There was a lot to talk about in this chapter.
There was.
We didn't really talk about Maester Aemon that much.
Well, we found out his lineage and stuff, but we talked about how he could have been king, but he chose not to.
Yeah, and
because he didn't want it to. What was it?
He was devoted to being a maester.
Yeah, he had sworn a vow.
Yeah, he sworn a
And,
vow.
it falls back to the same thing that's going on with John right now.
He
I
swore a
think
vow.
that's the biggest reason why Mormont, told him.
And they also mentioned that Aemon was tested 3 times. But because Aemon tells John that story in the last book, he was tested 3 times. And then Mormont tells him the story of like, yeah, well, not only was he tested 3 times, but he was also offered the chance to be king. And I think it gives John a lot to think about. And I also think it's a true testament to Aemon as a character, just that he's very steadfast. And my firm belief is that God, he could
honestly,
have really been a great king.
He could have been, but I mean, you know what they say, the best rulers are the ones who don't want it.
But yeah, he would have been great, and he refused it. And had he,
And that's why he would have been good.
right, he would have been great.
It's
The only reason he would have ever become king is if he didn't have a choice.
it's the paradox of things.
Absolute
People
power
who are
corrupts, absolutely. And people who want power seek power, and those who don't want power and who would be best suited to it don't seek it. It's so unfortunate. It really